All right, so I think we're about ready to start. So I'd like to thank everyone for showing up for the last presentation before the reception, which is why some of you are already discussing food and drink. My name's Tom Plunkett, and this presentation is going to be covering Hadoop in the public sector. And by the public sector, I'm referring to the U.S. federal government and state and local governments, as well as foreign governments. If you looked at the agenda, we actually had one other government speaker today. Chris Mattman was talking about NASA and some of the issues that NASA is facing. Did anyone attend that presentation? Okay, so that was a fairly detailed presentation. The presentation I'm about to do is going to be more of a breadth, high level, what is the federal government and the state and local governments doing, without going into quite as much detail as Chris went into. Just to kind of let me have an understanding of the demographics of the audience. How many people in here currently work for the federal government as an employee? Okay, what about state and local governments or foreign governments? Okay, what about contractors for the federal government or state and local governments? And what about vendors who sell to various government agencies? Okay, so that gives me an idea of the audience. Now here's a question just to kind of level set my understanding of what you think of the government. How many people in here think the federal government spends $200 million or less on Hadoop and big data related projects? Okay, how many people think the federal government spends between $200 million a year and $1 billion a year on Hadoop and big data related projects? And how many people think the federal government spends over $1 billion a year on Hadoop and related big data projects? And that does include the NSA. So, and that was the correct answer. All right, so what I'm going to do is later on I'll go through the numbers and explain where that came from and why that was an important proviso. Okay, just a little bit of a background on me and why I'm giving this presentation. I'm the Big Data Technical Lead for Oracle Public Sector. In 2009, I won a MapReduce research project for the Office of Secretary of Defense. 2010, I taught a MapReduce course for Virginia Tech's Computer Science Department, and around then I joined Oracle at the same time. In addition, I'm an author of a book on Oracle's big data products that's coming out next year. Other stuff that I didn't put on this slide, I've been teaching as adjunct instructor for Virginia Tech's Computer Science Department for about 14 years. Been working extensively with Java, so that's my main background and how I got into Hadoop projects. So the agenda on what I want to talk about today is, and this agenda actually changed because on March 29th, the Obama administration announced its Big Data Initiative. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time talking about the Obama administration Big Data Initiative because I see that a lot of people from DC understand it, but a lot of people in Silicon Valley have no clue as to what is going on. And since I've spoken personally with many of the program managers who are involved in the Big Data Initiative, I thought it'd be good for me to explain what it is and how you can pursue that funding through the Obama administration's Big Data Initiative. I will also talk a little bit about some current and ongoing Hadoop projects that different government agencies are funding, specifically the intel agencies, DoD, and civilian departments and agencies. There's no classified information in what I'm going to be presenting. Everything is based on publicly available information. So that's a brief look. Down at the bottom, I mentioned other governmental entities, and by that I refer to state and local agencies as well as foreign governments. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in those areas other than to say in many cases they're doing things similarly to what the U.S. federal government is doing. Most of my focus in this presentation is going to be on the U.S. federal government. So for those of you who are interested in the Obama administration's Big Data Initiative, this came out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And just to see a show of hands, how many people are familiar with the Big Data Initiative? Okay. What they announced on March 29th was that they're going to provide $200 million this year in funding. And this is on a highly accelerated schedule. Basically what they're doing is, on March 29th they announced it. Different programs were requesting proposals between April and July. So normally, if you think about a government procurement process, it's a couple years. In this case, we're talking a couple months between when they put the request out and when people are submitting proposals. They're expecting to do the awards this summer, and the work is going to start in September. So it's an extremely accelerated schedule, and this is not all the announcements. They're going to have additional announcements this summer that they couldn't get all the approvals for in time for March 29th. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. To put that $200 million in context, the Department of Defense right now is currently spending over $250 million a year on big data research. That figure came from a press release that they put out at the same time as the Obama administration's big data initiative announcement. Going back to what I said earlier about how much money is being spent, you could just look at those two numbers and say that, well, that's $450 million this year. But then you realize that doesn't cover all of the other research that was going on before this in all the other departments besides defense. So you figure the total number is probably somewhere between, at least $500 million in research, not counting the intel agencies. And the intel agencies are probably spending more than the rest of the government together. So just on research, you're probably talking over $1 billion a year. And that doesn't count production systems, which would be the NSA, which we were mentioning earlier, and also Army DSIGs and a few other places like that. So the real number is probably several billion. If you go back to what one of the keynote speakers said today about the fact that he was estimating there's $14 billion in Hadoop-related opportunity out there, I would expect the government portion of that is significant. So here's a brief, detailed look at what some of these different projects are in the Obama Big Data Initiative. And I'm just going to go through these. There are other ones that are out there, and there's others that will be announced relatively soon. DARPA DARPA is a defense agency that sponsors research projects. NSF and NIH are sponsoring some advanced big data science and engineering technology research projects. There's the NIH 1,000 Genomes project for research into genomes. Basically, that's being hosted on the Amazon cloud in S3. Department of Energy has an institute that's located here on the West Coast, not too far from here, in fact, that received $25 million for doing scalable data management, analysis, and visualization. U.S. Geological Survey has big data earth science research, and so on. Each one of these programs received about $25 million to spend this year. Several of them had proposals that are already due or are coming due in the next months. Let's see. Just a couple of highlights. I want to kind of give you a flavor for what the government's trying to fund. DARPA is a pretty interesting project that they put together with regards for X-Data. Essentially what they want to do is they want to do something similar to Apache Accumulo. They want to produce some enhancements to current big data technology and then donate them to an open source project. Presumably it'd be Apache, but they haven't actually announced who they're going to donate it to yet. It's essentially a 4-year project of $25 million a year in funding for data processing and data visualization. Now, for those of you in the audience, unfortunately you can't apply to it right now because the proposals were due a few weeks ago. However, that was just the first round of the broad agency announcement. There will probably be additional opportunities to participate in the X-Data program at some point unstated in the future, whether we're talking a year from now or a couple months from now, depending on whether or not they decided to fund the initial responses they received or whether they decide to do a further round. In addition, well, actually, let me go back one step and just talk a little bit more about what they were looking for there. They were really looking for people, whether it's universities or startup companies, that had an idea that would advance a state-of-the-art technology. They didn't want to pay someone to take an existing tool set and apply it to a data set. They wanted to fund someone to build something new that would help solve problems. And specifically, the specific use case they were interested in is helping the Army, of course. Because the Army is currently in a war in Afghanistan. And even though we're expected to pull out of there in the next 12 months or so, they want to rush tools in to help analytics operators in the field. And so as much as possible, they were looking for solutions that would help the tactical operators in the next 6 months. All Okay, so moving on to the next opportunity, and this one actually, if you can get your proposal in by 5 p.m., you can still apply for $5 million. $1 million a year for 5 years. Both DARPA Xdata and NSF are providing funds to multiple respondents. NSF is probably going to fund like 25 respondents out of this. DARPA Xdata probably is funding 5 to 10 teams out of its funding. Alternatively, if you're a small business and you're really only trying to support one person or 2 people, you could ask for $250K for like 3 years, and that's due a month from now on July 11th. And again, they're really just looking for technology enhancements. They're not asking you to take existing systems and apply them to data. They really want you to advance the state of the art and help people. And the goal in putting these projects out there is so that we increase the number of jobs in the data science area. We've been talking all along about how many companies are hiring, and the government really wants to increase that and accelerate it. The 1,000 Genomes project is another project that's being funded by NIH. It's a 200 terabyte public data set that's hosted on Amazon S3 for free. Researchers can access the data set for free, but they have to pay for any computational resources like Elastic MapReduce that they use in processing the genome data. And throughout this slide deck, I've included URLs to everything I'm referencing. So the slides are available afterwards, and if anyone wants to get a hold of me in case you can't find the slides on the conference site, my email address is tom.plunkett@oracle.com. First name, last name, @oracle.com, with a period in between first name and last name. The Department of Energy also received $25 million, and they gave it to an institute. So this institute is basically deciding how to spend the $25 million. They have several different big data projects that they're pursuing. They've got a data management project, a data analysis project, a visualization project, and a scientific software tools project. And I think this institute's like an hour away from here. The U.S. Geological Survey also received $25 million. Their proposals were actually the first ones due. They were due on April 30th. Imagine that, 1 month after the announcement, they were expecting research proposals. And again, it's basically Earth system science research. All right, so this gives you an idea of what the Big Data Initiative was. Now, the second part of my slide deck talks about ongoing big data projects. But first, I thought I'd maybe answer any questions anyone has about the Big Data Initiative. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to come up to the mic, and I'll answer your questions before I move on to the second half of the slide deck. Unless, of course, it's too late in the afternoon and everyone's ready to go to the reception. All right, I guess it's on to the second half of the slide deck and the reception. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the most important big data projects in the federal government. And probably the biggest one, and of course we can't actually say it is the biggest one because no one really knows, it's classified information. But the NSA announced it was using Hadoop at a National Defense University conference I was at in July of 2009. And basically their technical director was there, and he was talking about MapReduce, and I talked to him afterwards, and yeah, he said, yeah, it's Hadoop. So basically, if you look at the NSA's mission with regards to the global information grid, their goal is to understand all the information that's going across the world and to be able to analyze that information and support the warfighter in the field. And if you think about some of the comments we heard earlier today, I think it was Sean Connolly in one of the keynotes mentioned that he expects by 2015, 50% of the world's information will be touched by Hadoop. Well, I think it might be the NSA and its fellow intelligence agencies who will touch 50% of the world's information with Hadoop, because those are the projections as what they may have access to by 2015. In addition, NSA donated a cumulo to the Apache Software Foundation in 2011. They've been a heavy user of Hadoop. They're also an extremely big employer of Hadoop. If you look into help wanted ads near the NSA's headquarters, you'll see a lot of help wanted ads for people with Hadoop skills. And again, this is all publicly available information. Nothing classified about the help wanted ads. DSIGs is probably the other most important project using Hadoop in the federal government. For those who aren't familiar with DSIGs, it's a distributed common ground system. Who is familiar with DSIGs, just out of curiosity? Okay. So, and if you look at this diagram, this is an operational view. It's essentially, for those of you familiar with it, it's a DODAF, high-level architecture document. Again, it's unclassified. It's basically saying who does what. And if you look up in this diagram, and I actually have a pointer here, it's got this little comment here, data cloud. And this kind of goes back to what we used to call this technology 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we didn't call it big data. 3 years ago, we called it cloud computing. That's why Cloudera is cloud era. We also called it cloud data or cloud analytics. And so 3 years ago, oh, let me go back a step. 3 years ago, when they were putting together the DSIGs operational view, they called it a data cloud. No, they're not using virtualization, they're using Hadoop. But again, that's why they call it data cloud. And right next to it, you can even see the words open source. You know, they don't put Hadoop there, but you know, open source data cloud. I'll let you figure out what that means. And actually, you can see, again, in their help wanted ads, zillions of help wanted ads for Hadoop skills. You can see their tactical cloud laboratory has, you know, procurement RFPs to talk about Hadoop technology and so on. So all of this is unclassified. What are they using it for? Well, there's actually a number of different articles that talk about how they use it data cloud. For instance, the number one threat that the tactical military faces today is improvised explosive devices. So what they've done is they've actually used Hadoop to predict likely IED sites based on, you know, terrorist behavior and Army logistic routes. And so that's one of the examples. They also use a number of other products besides Hadoop. They use some of the analytical tools that go on top of Hadoop, products like digital reasoning and so on. So between them, what the NSA is doing and what DSIGs is doing is probably the two most advanced projects using Hadoop in the federal government today. But there are a lot of other projects. For instance, here's another one. The U.S. Navy has a tilt-rotor aircraft called the V-22 Osprey. Is anyone familiar with the V-22 Osprey? So basically, it can do vertical takeoffs like a helicopter, and then the wings, if you notice, they can rotate so that it can fly like a turboprop plane. And those engines generate a tremendous amount of sensor information that the Naval Air can use for condition-based maintenance. Basically, what they do is they use Hadoop to analyze trends in the information given off by the engine sensors to basically analyze whether other aircraft needed maintenance at a certain point. And then they look at that behavior, and then they say, well, this aircraft's probably going to need maintenance soon, and so it has maintenance before it ever goes out of service. So, and condition-based maintenance is a topic that's actually being picked up by a lot of other areas as well, based on this particular project. The Air Force is looking very heavily at condition-based maintenance. The commercial airlines are also looking at it very heavily. And the list goes on. There's a tremendous number of government agencies that are using Hadoop in a wide range of projects. And the White House put out a white paper that's like almost 20 pages long that lists probably 50 to 100 different projects. And I put the URL in here for it. Some of the departments and agencies that are using it are ones we've already talked about, like NASA, NIH, NSF. Some of them include like Food and Drug Administration, NARAL, the National Archives, Records, HHS, Department of Veteran Affairs, DHS, FBI. The list goes on. It's a huge list. All right. In addition, besides the civilian agencies, there's all of the state and local agencies, many of which are doing public safety, traffic, health issues. New York is looking very heavily at basically a health view of the constituents. We saw, during the keynotes, we saw some of the police and traffic examples earlier today. A lot of foreign governments are looking at the U.S. government and doing very similar things with Hadoop. For instance, the foreign governments are saying, hey, the NSA is using Hadoop all over the place. We should be doing it as well. You know, foreign militaries are looking at using Hadoop in tactical situations similar to how the Army is doing it. The Air Force is using the Air Force's version of DSIGs is also using Hadoop, but from a slightly different perspective. Instead of applying it to threat analysis, they're doing it on the data processing side, because the Air Force runs all the drones, they bring all the sensor information from the drones, and then they process that information before handing it off to NSA and the Army. My local power utility, the Tennessee Valley Authority, actually uses Hadoop to store power utility information. They use it as a cheap storage area. Basically, they store all their sensor data information from these 15-minute meter reads in a massive amount of HDFS. Basically, they're not even really doing much analysis on the HDFS at this point. They're just storing it for long term because they expect several years from now they'll be doing a lot of analysis. And there's many other additional examples we could go into. We could still be talking when the reception is over. But that's a high-level look at the Obama administration's Big Data Initiative, as well as some of the ongoing projects in the federal government. So I guess my question is, what do you want to discuss? So, and please come up to the mic.
With Hadoop being open source, are there any security concerns when this is being deployed in government?
So the question is, what are the security concerns in deploying Hadoop in the federal government? Well, you know, obviously there are some limitations to Hadoop. You know, if you think about how Hadoop provides security, you know, you've got a relatively simple security model of Hadoop. That's one of the reasons why the NSA developed the Apache Accumulo project, because they wanted a more enhanced security capability than, for instance, what HBase provided. Other questions?
What's Oracle's plans for using Hadoop in any of its products or offerings?
All right, so I got a question about what's Oracle's plans to use Hadoop. So again, I try not to do a commercial in this presentation, but we actually do have a commercial here in case someone asks a question. And he doesn't work for Oracle, by the way. So since you mention it, Oracle has a database appliance or a data warehouse called Exadata that some of you may have heard of. It's basically the database on steroids. It's a high-performance database, competes with Teradata and so on. In addition, we have a big data appliance, Hadoop on optimized hardware architecture, similar hardware architecture to what we're running over here with Exadata, except this architecture has been optimized for Hadoop as opposed to being optimized for the Oracle database. In addition, we have some specific big data connectors to go from a Hadoop cluster, whether it's on this hardware or not, into an Oracle database, whether it's on this hardware or not, since not everybody runs the Oracle database on this particular hardware platform. These connectors are extremely fast, and they're very high performance in moving into an Oracle database, far faster than the open source connectors like Scoop and so on. In addition, we've got our usual business intelligence platform and so on. We also have we have a recent acquisition, which isn't on this diagram, called Endeca. So we have a number of different big data technologies. So away from the commercial for the moment. Other questions? And I've done this presentation a number of times, so I figured someone would ask that question. And if not, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and enjoy the reception.